All right. Hey, Kipp.
Hi, Kira. How are you doing?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. It's always great when I get to talk to you.
I know. I'm so excited. We talked about almost a year ago for your podcast. We were talking about what was it? What did we talk about? The VP? No, it was like potential. Yeah, we talked about Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, you came on to do Bernie's chart.
Yes. Oh, wow. Back in the good old days pre-Rona.
Oh
Um,
my God, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it was actually the last time I was in LA before I moved here. And it was like basically the first or second day I arrived on like this little trip I was taking for my birthday, met up with Diana. Um, so yeah, this is wild that now I have a podcast and you're on it.
Yay. God, that
um,
feels like 35 years ago for so many reasons.
I know, it really does. Well, okay, so I guess just to start out, today, right now, we're recording on Friday, October 16th. It is the Libra new moon, which is conjunct the fixed star Spica, which is pretty cool. And yeah, we're going to be talking about the 2020 US election and all the astrology surrounding it. So, to start out, Kip, do you mind sharing your sun, moon, rising?
Sure. My rising sign is Gemini. My sun sign is Virgo, and my moon sign is Libra.
Wow, where's your Mercury?
My Mercury is stationed direct at 9 degrees Virgo.
Wow, awesome. I don't know why I didn't know that about you. Maybe I did, but very mercurial, very like that exalted Mercury. That's amazing. I'm always jealous of those. Oh, speaking of, forgot to put on my Mercury talisman. Whew.
Ooh, oh, that's a good podcast tool.
Yeah, I wear it every podcast. Also every reading I do. Any sort of speaking.
I kind of am a Mercury talisman, so
Yes, yes. Yeah, this one is Exalted Mercury. I think it's probably not too far away from your natal Mercury. I forget exactly where it is, but yeah, I love it. And then I feed it with some Mercury Kazemi oil from Sphere and Sundry.
ooh.
It's great. Yeah. Um so tell us a little bit more about your astro practice. You don't do readings, right? You don't do consultations?
I don't. I just don't have time.
Yeah.
The family, the podcast, and now with the Rona, I mean, I've got the kids at home all the time. I just got
Yeah.
a puppy, so
Oh my
I'm loading
God.
my plate. My plate is
What
overflowing.
kind of puppy?
It's a wire-haired pointing Griffon. She's about
Oh
six
my
months old.
God. Wow. Okay.
She's very cute, and she's sleeping right next to me in her crate, so I'm not going to say her name.
Oh, oh, okay.
But the name is actually the same name as the person who you came on my podcast to do the review of.
Wait, which
That
person?
person's first name. Remember, we looked at that
Bernie
person's chart? Yeah.
Sanders?
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Bernie?
Yeah.
That's so sweet. Oh my God. I was like, wait, was it Kamala? But then we didn't talk about Kamala. We talked about the VP, the potential VP nominees. Were you surprised that it was? I mean, I don't think anyone was too surprised, but like after going through all the charts for the potential VP nominees, were you expecting Kamala or were you expecting someone else?
Yeah. And I'm not the only one. But I predicted it like 6 weeks before.
Yeah.
Her chart was lit up. I thought it not only looked like she was going to have a prominent role this fall, but if anyone had any astro intelligence, her chart is really positive during this period of time. And so
Hmm.
I never give the blue team any credit for storycraft or for like spiritual connectiveness. But you just always cross your fingers that maybe someone whispered something.
Yeah. I agree. Well, tell us a little bit more about the podcast, The Basement Astrologers.
Sure. I actually haven't recorded in a few weeks. We did a bunch of camping, and frankly, I pay so much attention to mundane with the podcast. Not guests. When I have guests on, I try to get them to, tease out whatever they're into. But my interest in a lot of ways has to do with mundane astrology, especially when so much is happening. I
Mhm.
did the whole series with the potential candidates and had some really great people on, including yourself, to talk about it. That it's kind of too intense for me right now. Like my life is so intense. 3 kids at home studying on computers, and I'm working, I'm teaching them, got a new puppy. I look at the skies and it's not like there's like a warm fuzzy blanket coming at me, from the skies. So while I pay attention every day and it's constantly on while I'm doing whatever, and I don't ever not know like the degree the moon's at.
Right.
Communicating about it right now, like I
It's
think the
rough.
fact that you started this podcast right now, I honestly like lifts a burden off me. You do such a great job. I love you.
Thank
I
you.
love all your guests. So I'm like, oh, someone's picked up the mantle while I'm taking a hiatus. This is great.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad that there was that sort of inadvertent yeah, help your way, even though I didn't I didn't plan it that way, but I'm glad.
But
Um
astrology, for me, is it's a daily, constant practice. It invades everything I do, all the time.
mhm.
Um, I would love to have the opportunity to consult. Early on, when I just had a little more wiggle room, I did some consultations. Never really for compensation, but I really liked it. It's great getting to commune with people and share the gift of astrology. But I'm just kind of in a different place than a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with 3 kids and
Yeah.
a new puppy. Well, I'm happy that I was able to get you on here today because I knew just from previous discussions that we've had that, we could nerd out over these charts together. Not everyone likes talking about politics or the election, and that is 100 million% understandable.
And okay.
Yeah, and completely okay. Like if I mean, if you're listening to this, you're probably somewhat interested, but to my other listeners who decided to skip this episode, I do not blame them. It's stressful. We're in stressful times, and yeah, but well, I guess actually quickly before we jump into it, let's talk a little bit about how we know each other.
Oh yeah.
I think we probably just met the first time at NORWAC 2019, like I met everyone else I know, basically.
We did. We did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was like an A fan sort of like meet and greet situation that was like outside and we were like in a little group together. Was that what it was?
That was it. And the funny part is, and this happens all the time, that I had a bunch of mutuals from just being at NORWAC the year before, and to some extent Astro Twitter. But like there are people that I meet and I realize immediately. Did you hear anything I said?
I said I heard there's people that you meet and then it cut out.
It There are people you meet, especially when I do Astro stuff, that I
hmm
immediately know. Hey, we have like 5 super close friends. Like we're
Yeah,
basically like in the same friend group. We just
right.
haven't met face to face. And then we got to talk about the New York astrological community. I had never got to have that talk, but I really love Annie Ortley.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
our practices are different, but I think someone's had this discussion recently. It might be Diana, who's another one of our mutuals, just talking about accepting some of our older astrologers for who they are and the knowledge they've gained. And when I listen to Annie, number one, she's awesome and she pays so much attention and she's so on the spot so often
Virgo.
that's great. Yeah, totally. But also, it's like almost a little time capsule of listening to someone whose astrological practice has been built up over the last 40 years, and you kind of see those remnants of when folks just paid more attention to different things, and I think that's really cool. She
hmm
talks about stuff that I just don't pay that close of attention to, and I not only find that valuable, but I just love the like time capsule aspect of it.
Yes, that's very true. Um, Yeah, and there has been a lot of drama with her lately. I don't know if you've seen on Twitter, but that's a discussion for another podcast because we could talk about that for a long time. But yeah, I mean, she's someone that I had followed for since I got into astrology and totally agree about those aspects. And just listening to her podcast, and I mean, I've known her in person as well in New York. Um, yeah, Virgo astrologers, and I just, it speaks to me. It's my seventh house, so I have a special affinity, I guess, for the detail-oriented types, the ones who have, like, all the little bits of knowledge. I love that. Um, all right, so let's hop into it. Let's talk
Mhm.
about this goddamn election. So I guess to start, we can kind of take a peek at the two presidential candidates. Well, the current president, number 45, is what I tend to refer to him as. And then Joe Biden's charts, because we actually have time charts for both of them, which is pretty phenomenal. And then we can also take a peek at Kamala Harris's chart, because I think that's really interesting and important. And then also Mike Pence's chart, which is not a time chart, but we can sort of see what we can get out of it. And then we can look at sort of a couple charts about, or yeah, a couple charts that kind of are important dates in this whole election process. So that would be election day. I want to look at the full moon, which is happening in a couple days before election day too, because I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously the chart of election day, and then also the chart of election day on the year 2000, because we have some weird similarities there. And then I wanted to look at the eclipse charts for, following the election, and just talk about the astrology that happens um, after the election. A lot. We'll see what we can do in the time that we have. Um, Okay, so to start, let's see, where do we start? Well, I guess let's start talking about like what's going on here. So, we have this election between, the Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And obviously Donald Trump's trying to get a second term in office. I think, yeah, we're definitely hoping for that to not happen. I'll just put it out there that I am 100% like anti Donald Trump, anti GOP. I am a leftist. I don't expect this to be like a non-biased discussion. I want to put that out there. Um, yeah, I'm gonna look at it, and I'm gonna look at the charts in a sort of, I don't know if I can look at it in a non-biased way, but as much of a what's the word I'm looking for? Like non 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 super judgmental sort of way, I guess, and sort of just talk about the astrology and what's gonna happen. I'm not gonna be looking at it in like, a way that's like constantly shitting on the other side, but just know that that's my views. At least I'm not trying to have this discussion that's like, super non-biased and act like I'm just like some observer that isn't like a black queer woman who would be totally affected by another 4 years of this administration.
I
um
think that's fair, but and we can still look at the symbols and interpret them as they exist in the
right,
chart and in the transits. Um,
exactly.
expressing bias ahead of time,
Yeah.
it's pretty fair.
Yeah, I've just seen, astrologers, especially older astrologers, talking about this election. Like for instance, there was an ESAR panel about the election, and everyone I think was very careful to, not everyone, but a lot of folks were very careful to try to remain non-biased, because obviously there are, not the entire astrology community is not very leftist. A good chunk are, but not everyone. And so, yeah, I mean, I have a feeling most of my audience like knows my positions on things, so they're not really expecting me to be like, this super non-biased person, but just wanted to put that out there. Okay, let's start with the current president and his birth chart. So I'm going to share my screen, and if you're just listening to the video, I mean to the audio, I will describe as much as I can. But just so you know that the video version will be released on YouTube too. So yeah, to start out, Donald Trump, he was born on June 14th, 1946 at 10:54 a.m. in Queens, New York, if you want to pull up his chart. There are some weird discrepancies around this time, but from what I've seen, this works really well. I think this is like a recorded time on a birth certificate, I believe. And also, if you are a patron of the Astrology podcast, hosted by Chris Brennan, him and Lisa Scheim did a casual astrology podcast episode all about this and all about the elections and the charts surrounding this, similar to what Kipp and I are doing. Um, and yeah, if you want to hear more about like the more detailed aspects of like those charts and you know how Trump's chart might have been a little bit earlier, all these things, they kind of go deep into it. So just so you know, that's available too. We're not going to get that deep into the technicalities. But anyway, so Donald Trump is a Gemini sun. His sun is at 22 degrees, 55 minutes of Gemini. It's pretty much conjunct the North Node at 20 degrees Gemini. And there's also Uranus at 17 degrees Gemini, all in the 11th house. His moon is at 2112 Sagittarius. So that's a full moon, but it's also conjunct the South Node at 20 Sag. So he was born during total lunar eclipse, like an exact, almost exact. It was building towards exact. So yeah, it's fifth house, moon and Sag on the South Node. Yeah, and then his ascendant is 29 degrees Leo. And he has Mars pretty close by at 26 degrees Leo. And some of you might know that 29 degrees of Leo or 0 degrees of Virgo is a fixed star called Regulus. And that's that's the most royal of the royal stars. So that's something to note as well. And then he has a bunch of planets in Cancer. He has his Mercury, his Saturn, and Venus in Cancer in the 12th house. He has Neptune and Jupiter in the third house in Libra. So, Kipp, what stands out to you when you look at Trump's chart?
So I think that without question, the first thing you see is the eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been a loose cannon most of his life in a lot of different ways. I don't think we need to go full biography here. People are pretty familiar. Um, then you see Mars can join the ascendant. And this is a guy that has had unbridled amounts of energy his whole life, and has always been, in one way or another, feisty. Um, it's just always been who this person is, and it's led to the impulsiveness of this person's drive has clearly led to huge ups and down swings in their life. And then the last thing I look at, especially knowing what's going on right now, is I look at the packed 12th house, and you look at that the third decan. You have Saturn at 23 Cancer, and you have Venus at 25 Cancer. And for folks who, maybe you listen to this 3 months from now to hear what idiots we are because we predicted everything wrong, or you're listening now, those spots are just getting hammered by, I don't know what term you want to use, the COVID clump or the meat
The
grinder. I like the
cardinal
meat grinder.
crunch.
The
Someone said
card. Oh,
cardinal
that's a
crunch.
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Where exactly opposite in Capricorn, we have Pluto and Saturn, kind of the two baddest bads in the zodiac, just really pressing on those two personal planets. And so those, when I just look at this, I see lots of stuff in the 12th house, a hidden place, a place that can show us anxiety. It can show us troubles during transits with large institutions and foundational organizations. Governments are oftentimes used, or that type of thing. I look at Mars conjoined, the ascendant, someone who is fiery and can kind of be, for lack of a better term, a jackwagon at times. And I look at that eclipse, and you just see it. You see someone who's a loose cannon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, especially with the sun Uranus. Um,
Yeah,
Let me take off that
Uranus is right
Bible.
there too.
I know, it's just so extra. um, yeah, I mean, I think of like that the the Sag Gemini axis having a lot to do with communication and messaging and um like getting a word out basically, and thinking about the fact that he kind of, he didn't get a start this way, but he kind of became super famous because of his TV show. Um, and yeah, I mean, which is such a Gemini thing. And it's funny because like I watched that show. We loved that show growing up. He was just like a nut. We laughed at it. And I think we had like a board game. It's wild to think that man could go on to destroy so many lives, after just like being this dumb TV show host. Um, but yeah, there's something around messaging, and I think it's always very notable that he is someone that um has been able to really like, galvanize this base through his messaging. And he came out with this very, when he first what is it called, when he first kind of came out on the scene in terms of, well, he had been running for president for a couple times leading up to 2016, but in 2015 when he like came out that escalator or whatever, and he spouted all that like hatred, um that was what galvanized people like around him. And yeah, there's just something about his ability to kind of get a message out and really excite people with it. That's really interesting to me. um
So I I don't I think we should move on from this chart, but one other thing I do want to talk about is that there is an exact trine between Uranus at 17 Gemini and Jupiter at 17 Libra. So there's this expansion, kind of a bit of good luck or jovialness that gets added to Uranus, which is just raw disruption. And I've done a lot of work looking at Uranus transits kind of on a more mundane level, and the influence on style. And in a lot of ways, you can break down when trends switch almost in generational fashion based on when Uranus moves through signs. And I think that this has a lot to do with, if Trump has a genius, it is this messaging. Um, it's always been the thing that Donald did. Um, he used to make up personas and call the tabloids and just make sure that he was in the news with some new thing that was shaking things up so that he was in people's consciousness.
mhm,
Um, and so when I see this natal transit, you see um, almost no tether to anything earthy or weighted down or substantial. You see disruption communicated and thought about. And so one way to think of him coming down that escalator is he was all loaded up with his right wing media world, and just threw stuff out there, and the stuff that he knew people were saturated with at the time, he packaged and messaged. And you really saw a lot of that during um, the manner in which he campaigned. He literally used his crowds like focus groups, the stuff that they reacted to,
mhm.
the trends, the things that were disruptive and fed them. Those are the things he just kept saying. Um, it's almost like the first PR professional becoming president.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the fact that that Gemini cluster is in the 11th house of like groups and, affiliations. it just shows that, like, yeah, he found that group of people that were going to support him no matter what. And it's been pretty much an unwavering support over the past, 5 years. Um, Despite everything that's happened. And we don't have to go into all the details because it's literally impossible, it's too much. But yeah, I like that you mentioned that Uranus Jupiter trine. Yeah, there, and then there's something about also, like, what you were saying, like the right wing media, and I kind of look at that third house too. It's just like this support from Fox News and this and Breitbart, and all these sort of like media organizations that did such an important job in supporting and uplifting his message. And looking at Jupiter as like the most positive planet in his chart, the benefic of sect, in the third house there. Yeah, kind of like feeding into that eclipse as well. As it's really interesting.
They're his folk.
Yeah.
And you even look at this taken like that. You see that North Node in Jupiter really close, making contact. You see bigger and bigger and feeding and feeding. And you
Hmm.
look at some of the, I don't want to say the name out loud, some of the conspiracy stuff that's gathered with him as like this idolized legend. You
Hmm.
see this combination of the 11th house, like your allies, your work friends, that kind of stuff, groups. And then you see the third house, which I like to think of as your folk, and the messaging and the all together gathered, and just he's like a perpetual motion machine, just pumping the stuff out. And then it's
Yeah.
all a bunch of a bunch of the stuff is in Gemini, a place where it's collect data, communicate. Never mind the data's value. We didn't look at that.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
just collect data, communicate.
Yeah, there's no Virgo filtering of any of the
Yeah, there's
data. It's just
zero.
information being thrown at you.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
and
being
yeah.
recorded. I probably should put my glasses down.
But yeah, then and then also just again that the 12th house stuff, and the fact that he is in a third house perfection year, so his third house is activated and therefore his Venus is activated, and there's been a lot of third house things happening for him. In particular, his brother dying, his niece coming out with like that book about the family and secrets, and of course his Venus is in the 12th house, which um might have a lot something to do with like what's kept hidden behind the scenes, secretive. um yeah, there's, and then also him getting diagnosed with coronavirus, as Venus crossed over his ascendant. Lots of
And
things.
Venus is being opposed by Saturn for just huge
Yep.
swaths of time as Saturn moves back and forth, slows down,
Yeah.
from his sixth house, the house of bad health. I mean, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, his Venus Saturn conjunction being squared by Mars in Aries and opposed by both Pluto and Saturn, and I guess you could even add in Jupiter, um, all in his sixth house of yeah, illness and injury. So there's a lot there. Um,
Not to this is the last time I'll mention my podcast, but I did have a Cute Bava. I hope I'm saying that right.
yeah,
Nay,
I think
Adam
it's
Ellenbass,
Akuta.
come on.
Yeah.
Akuta, come on and look at this chart with me. So if you really want to deep dive again into
Oh,
this chart,
that,
Akuta like plowed deep in.
yeah. Yeah, definitely check out that episode of Kipp's podcast. I haven't listened to that, but I have heard. I watched Akuta. He did some sort of like YouTube video about. I think he did a horary around Trump getting the virus and what might come of it, and that was really interesting too. So yes, okay. So let's move on. I'm gonna pull up Biden's chart. Joe Biden. Um, because yeah, some interesting things to look at here. More 12th house stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is like the battle of the 12th house guys.
Yeah. So Joe Biden was born on November 20th, 1942. Again, it's so weird that both of them are younger, somehow younger than my father. um, he was born at 8:30 a.m. in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So if you pull up that chart, you'll get a 3 degrees Sagittarius rising chart. His sun is at 27 degrees Scorpio and his moon's at 0 degrees Taurus. So yeah, Scorpio sun, Taurus moon, Sag rising. And he actually has this kind of 12th house stellium in Scorpio. His Mars is at 12 Scorpio, his Mercury is at 21 Scorpio, his sun's at 27, and his Venus is at 28. So he has a ton of Scorpio planets. He then also has his Uranus is at 2 Gemini, pretty much on the descendant, and his Saturn is at 9 degrees Gemini. He has Jupiter at 25 Cancer, which is his chart ruler, which is really interesting because that's also getting hit by this cardinal crunch, which I was going to say Cosmos and Psyche on Twitter and Instagram is who I heard that from. So I just want to give credit. I love that Cardinal Crunch. There's a meme about it. So yeah, Jupiter at 2025 Cancer. His North Node is at 0 degrees Virgo, which is interesting. That's pretty much right on top of Trump's ascendant, and also on the fixed star Regulus. Yeah. So Biden's chart. What stands out to you about this chart?
So the first thing that I look at when I see this chart is all the 12th house stuff. It's packed. 4 personal planets in the 12th house in Scorpio. Not all those planets happy. Venus under the beams, only 1 degree away from the sun, in her realm of detriment. She's not comfy and happy there. Um, but we also have Mars there. Mars is at home. This is a guy who has really been active and going for, since before I was born, when he was first elected to Senate. Joe Biden was elected to Senate at before he was legally able to take the office, but he was turning 30 before he would be sworn in. That's
Wow.
how long Joe Biden has been in public life. And then the thing that I think can't be overlooked here is that we have a Sag rising, and this is a guy that shoots from the hip. Like every Sag, throw it out there.
Mm-hmm.
He's got all those, and I think that the primary driver of that, if you look at it from his nativity, is that we have the moon in Taurus, so the moon's favorite place to be, and we have Jupiter in Cancer, the Jupiter's favorite place to be, and there's mutual reception there. Now these aren't the greatest spots. In his chart, we have Jupiter in the 8th house, the house that has everything to do with death, other people's money, and we have the moon in the 6th house, the house of bad health, they used to be considered the house of slavery. I think now we think of it more like toil, work,
Mm-hmm.
the effort you put in every day. But Joe's life was spent in a lot of ways serving these two masters. He was the senator from Delaware and did a little more to assist the banking industry that I'm frankly comfortable with, but was for most of his life the voice or a voice of blue collar workers of that 6th house, trying to make their lives um, materially better. And we see that moon in the 6th house, in Taurus, the house of stuff that feels good, tastes good, is comforting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I look at when I see this guy. I see trouble. There's been
Mm-hmm.
trouble, but I see someone with kind of boundless amounts of optimism, of internal comfort, whose life, primary positive places in his life are focused on other folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I see that like nearly full moon in Taurus. It probably was full like the next night or something. Um, I see that as someone really dedicated to some sort of service. Um, and yeah, the 12th house, 6th house axis just to me screams like you're here to serve. You're here to yeah, to kind of like give your life for others in a way. And of course, we know that Joe Biden has dealt with quite a bit of loss in his life, some really tragic losses of family members. The ruler of his ascendant and his fourth house of home and family being in the eighth house of death. And he had lost his with his wife and son, right, in a car accident. And then more recently lost his son. Was it brain cancer?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, I believe that was 2016 or 2015. It was like around the time, or maybe it was even sooner.
It might have been 2014, 2015, that
Okay,
time
yeah.
range. Hmm.
Because I remember people like thinking that he was going to run in 2016, but he wasn't ready. And yeah. So, yeah, Joe Biden's dealt with quite a bit of loss and, grief in his life. And I think when I think of Scorpio energy, especially someone with like four planets in Scorpio in the 12th house, to me, that speaks to a sort of emotional resilience. Um, and I definitely see that in Joe Biden being able to, after so much loss, continue to serve. And he just, to me, like, I wasn't thrilled when Joe Biden won the nomination for the Democrats. I definitely,
You were the one?
I was definitely rooting for a couple other candidates, but um it kind of hit me at a point where I was just like, especially after coronavirus had taken off, and it kind of hit me where I was just like, I think maybe Joe Biden is the person that can like help us take a moment to just grieve like all the loss that has occurred in this country just over this past year, um and then the losses and the pain that the country has been through the last 4 years even. It feels like I look at this chart and I'm like, that's someone that can hold space for that. And it's something that we need. Like we as a country haven't really been able to take a time collectively to think about the over 200,000 lives lost just in the past, what, 8, 9 months. Um, yeah, and I just feel like he might be the person or person that could to kind of like, yeah, hold some space for the country in that way. um so yeah, I that's something I appreciate about him. And yeah, what else do you think of like that 12th house, the 12th house, 8th house um combo to me is just so wild. And then, oh, here's one thing I wanted to note. That Saturn and Gemini in the seventh is really interesting too. Not a sign that Saturn really loves to be in, I don't think. I don't think it is an air sign. I think Saturn does pretty well in air signs. Um, it's trine his natal, or it's trine Saturn's diurnal rulership in Aquarius. It's trine its exaltation in Virgo. Oh, sorry, in Libra. So it's not terrible, but it is, I think, a little bit more fickle than Saturn would prefer, being ruled by Mercury. And I think that kind of shows in he's had issues with his speech. Um, throughout his life, he has a stutter. Um, he's done, it doesn't really come out so much nowadays, but that's something that he had to deal with a lot growing up, I think. And yeah, that he always kind of has, not always, but he's had these sort of like missteps in some of the things that he's said throughout the decades and on the campaign trails and stuff like that. So yeah, that's something that kind of stands out to me. But yeah, thinking about that seventh house in terms of partnership too, and he's not even talking about like he's had multiple wives, but that's because of loss. Um, but thinking about Gemini being in the seventh house and how his running mate is a Gemini rising, and
Mm.
her first house kind of just fits really nicely into his seventh, and his first house fits nicely into her seventh. So that's something I really appreciated about that, the combo of those two. um any other thoughts about Biden's chart?
I would just say that lastly, you see Saturn in that seventh house. And traditionally, this is not a wonderful placement. But one thing it does bring is stability and long lastingness, and a view of things that are not only stable, but could potentially be revered once they've become established. And Joe, in a lot of ways, is a partner to so many parts of the greater blue team slash left project.
Mm,
Um, and it's not always been wonderful. Um, but now we really see someone who's stable, who our expectations of this person are set as someone we partner with as people and as a country. And I think that those are all reflected in his life. One last thing, and I we're falling into these charts pretty good, which is great. I mean, I love this stuff. um if there are folks who are interested in the nodes as sort of um, projectiles of destiny, and there's different takes in the nodes. Joe's moon, his exalted moon, is exactly trine his north node and sextile his south node. This is a really these are benefic transits from a benefic placement. And that north node is at the very top of the chart. Um, so we look at this comforting internal um, stability that we get out of that moon in Taurus, and we see it exactly trying that north node, and that's something else we're seeing from Uncle Joe now. Is that
mhm,
there's a certain amount of comfort when he just I watched part of the town hall that he did, and he was asked questions and just gave answers like someone who pays attention to policy and has objectives for government functioning. And and it was like that should just be what happens, but it really
mhm.
was. It was comforting. Like it felt like, oh, we're back home here.
Yeah, a little bit of stability.
Yeah.
We're all looking for some of that. All right. And yeah, I guess just to note, since we talked about Trump's 12th house, Saturn Venus conjunction in late Cancer, I guess I didn't really notice before that that Joe's chart ruler Jupiter falls right on top of that. Um, and yeah, I don't know. That's really interesting to me that all the candidates kind of had this weird synastry going on. But so Joe's Jupiter is also getting hit by the cardinal crunch. Um, Saturn is opposing it and actually just stationed retrograde, or sorry, stationed direct, opposite that Jupiter. And then we also have Pluto down here opposing it. And then of course Mars and Aries in the fifth house, and in Joe's fifth house squaring it. And I think it's interesting because um, Mars in Joe's chart is in the 12th house and is also the malefic out of sect. So it is a little bit more problematic, even though um, it is in its own sign. And 12th house can often refer to hidden enemies or enemies, in some cases. And I think it's funny that Mars is now in his fifth house, and it's kind of like his enemy Trump using his son,
Yeah.
Hunter Biden, as like this. That's kind of like that's where he's trying to hurt Joe, is by like using his son, which I think is really interesting. Especially because like Trump's kids are like by far a million times worse than anything Joe or anything Hunter Biden has done. um but you don't really see the left, even, or I should just say like Biden and his campaign going after Trump's kids in the way that the GOP and Trump is going after Joe Biden's kid. And even in the debate, um, Trump was kind of going after Hunter Biden to Joe Biden, and Joe kind of started to talk about his other son, who, what was his name? Um, I feel
There,
bad for forgetting.
there was Hunter and Bo.
Bo, yeah, Bo Biden, who passed away. And yeah, Joe, I mean, and Trump was just like, yeah, I don't know Bo, but I do know Hunter. And like Joe Biden had this very heartfelt, beautiful like moment about his son. And Trump just completely disregarded it and started like shitting on his other son, which I was just like, wow, okay. Um, but but anyway, yeah, that's just something I thought of, how, that square coming from the fifth house to his chart ruler was really interesting.
Really briefly,
Mhm.
one of the top things I've been looking at this whole year is 22 degrees Capricorn,
Mhm.
because that is where Pluto Saturn conjunction. It's where Jupiter Pluto conjunction. That third decan in and of itself is meat grindery, but I think
Mhm.
that spot is the spot. Um, and where we see in Trump's chart that third decan of Cancer is in a spot that you're not always looking for personal planets to be if you want a smooth existence. We're seeing somewhat similar with Joe's Saturn, but that Saturn is just much healthier. Um,
Mhm.
and where I'm going with this is that um, Pluto and Jupiter are power makers. That's one of the things they look for when they're doing stock market predictions. If you go through history, uh, Sun Pluto and Jupiter Pluto are things that you really see an amount of force coming out of them. And when we look at Joe, what we have is his most driving placement in his chart, rules the ascendant, really well placed, other than its house, um, is the point in his chart that is opposing, that is making contact with the this 22 third decan of Capricorn. We just see him natally so much better positioned
Mhm.
to interact with the power dynamics of now.
Yes, you're so right. Um, Joe, his Jupiter at 25 Cancer is exalted, and it is in a day chart, so it's the most positive planet in his chart. Whereas, and also it's a loose sextile, but it does have this. I would say it's about 5 degrees sextile to his midheaven, which also helps mitigate that eighth house placement.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. Whereas in Trump's chart, his Venus, is a benefic, and isn't doesn't do poorly in Cancer, but it is in the 12th house, and it's conjunct his Saturn, which again, it's a day chart, so Saturn isn't necessarily as malefic as his Mars is, but it is in the sign of its detriment. And so comparatively, Joe's Jupiter definitely is in a much better position to, like you said, receive those aspects from planets in late Capricorn.
Yeah, Saturn in detriment conjoined your natal uh, Venus is really a tough placement, and you put it in the
Mm-hmm.
12th house, and that's really a tough placement. And then you start slamming it with malefics as they transit from your house of health. I don't want to elaborate on that anymore, but let's just say not a ton of astrologers who pay attention to transits were super surprised that the president fell ill.
Yeah, and not to mention Trump's first house of self and body is Leo, ruled by the sun, and the sun is currently in fall in Libra. Um, his yeah, there's a lot there. His
Squaring the COVID clump, or however
yeah,
we want to, yeah.
exactly. Yeah, there's a lot there, but one thing that's really interesting to me, I'm paying a lot of attention to like the full moons that are coming up, and like throughout the end of the year, and eclipses. And again, I have right now, if you're looking at the video version, there's Joe Biden's chart in the inner wheel and Trump's chart in the outer wheel. And there's two full moons coming up that are interesting. So one is going to be, and I'll pull up the charts for this too, on Halloween. We have a full moon in Taurus, which is going to be conjunct transiting Uranus. I believe it's at 8 or 9 degrees. I'll pull up the chart in a sec. So that's interesting. It'll be in Biden's sixth house and Trump's 10th house. But then I'm also looking at there's going to be a lunar eclipse in Gemini on November 30th. So this is after the election, and that's going to be at 8 degrees Gemini, right on top of Joe Biden's Saturn. And then we're gonna have at the end of the year, then we'll have, sorry, I'll go in order. And then the next lunation is a solar eclipse at 24 degrees of Sagittarius. So that's gonna be in Joe's first house. And that's Trump's fifth house, I believe. And that's pretty close to Trump's natal moon on the south node. So that's interesting how there's going to be this eclipse on his moon, which rules his 12th house, and like what's going to be revealed in that with that 12th house stuff. Um, so yeah, there's that. And then following that, we have a full moon in Cancer at the end of the year. I believe it's like December 30th, and that's going to be right on top of Trump's natal Mercury in his 12th house. So that's at 8 degrees of Cancer. And yeah, it's just, I think it's interesting how they kind of both have these like almost exact hits from these lunations happening with a bunch of their natal placements. And to me it makes it a little bit hard to predict because it's like, okay, like, what's going to happen, what does this mean for each of them? But we can talk about that. But I quickly want to kind of look at Harris and Pence's charts, um, and particularly Kamala Harris, because it's just I just there's a lot to look at with her chart, and transits that are happening with her, because she's also getting hit by this cardinal crunch. And yeah, we have a time chart for her as opposed to Pence, which we don't. So Kamala Harris was born on October 20th, 1964 at 9:28 p.m. in Oakland, California. And if you pull up her chart, you'll see that she has a sun. Her sun is at 27 degrees of Libra in the fifth house. Her moon's at 27 degrees of Aries in the 11th house. So she was born on a full moon. It's like an exact full moon by degree. And then her rising sign is Gemini at 24 degrees Gemini. Her north node is actually also exactly conjunct her ascendant at 24 degrees Gemini. So she's actually currently moving through a nodal return, as is Donald Trump. They both have their nodes around 20, between 20 and 24 Gemini, and the nodes are actually currently like transiting around 20 right now. So that's interesting. Um, some other placements of hers. So she is this Libra sun. Her Mercury is actually at 1 degree of Scorpio in the sixth house. So her chart ruler, Mercury rules her Gemini rising, is that Mercury in Scorpio. And that's kind of like how when I think of Kamala Harris, I think of that Mercury in Scorpio. I think because I was first really introduced to her during the confirmation the confirmation hearings for Brett Kavanaugh. And I remember just the way that she questioned him. It was just so, I remember pulling up her chart being like, what is this woman's deal? And saw that Mercury in Scorpio that was just, yeah. It's also insect, I think. Or is it? Yeah. Yeah. It's in the evenings. It's an evening star. She was born at night, so she has this like, night sect Mercury that is just kind of, it's just super powerful in my opinion, that in Scorpio. And she very much does like cut deep with her words. And yeah, she doesn't really just say anything to say it, which is a
She'll
nice counter to Joe, I think.
she'll sting you.
Yeah, she'll definitely use that stinger. Um, and she has, what else? She has her Mars is in Leo in the third house. Um, and again, that's a night chart. And yeah, it's not too bad of a placement for Mars. I'll say that.
And its whole
Her,
sign trining Mars retrograde. So
yes,
yeah.
it's true. Especially currently, actually, Mars had just completed its second trine to her natal Mars. And she has three planets in her fourth house. She has Uranus, Pluto, and Venus pretty much in a stellium. They're within 4 degrees, all conjunct in her in Virgo in her fourth house. Um, and that Venus, although it is in fall, it is still the most positive planet in her chart, being angular, and she has a night chart, so Venus becomes the most positive planet. And then she has Jupiter in Taurus in the 12th house at 24 degrees Taurus. And then lastly, we have Saturn at 28 Aquarius. So, yeah, that's in her ninth house.
Only four
So,
degrees away from her MC. So
yes, only
Saturn
four
is, yeah.
degrees. It's very close, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, first impressions when you see this chart.
So I agree with you 100%. You look at someone who can sting with her communication. You also see that Mercury in the sixth house, again, communicating for those who work. Um, that you definitely see the full moon. It's almost, they're both at 27 degrees. It's almost exact to the degree. They're only like nine. I don't know what's the 2748 is the sun and 2739 is the moon. I mean, this
Yeah.
is a really, really precise full moon. Um, so two things that I think are really important when we discuss this chart. Number one is how Kamala, I apologize, is receiving the COVID cluster.
Hmm.
The and it's in a trine. We see Jupiter at 24 degrees Taurus. So as things transit that third decan of Capricorn, they're trining Jupiter and loosely trining Venus.
Hmm.
So this, as this third decan is transited, they're being received by Kamala's most benefic planets.
Hmm.
Um, the other thing that I think is really striking is that Kamala is going to have a lot of the cardinal crunch square her moon and sun. However, we have Saturn way up in her chart, really close to her MC, a place where we see there can be delays in reaching our pinnacle, but once we get there, there's a ton of stability and authority there. And we can see that in this is someone who's both her parents were professors at Ivy League or adjacent universities,
Hmm.
and she ended up going to Howard. No shade at Howard, wonderful university, not the same as Yale, just in the eyes of the political universe.
Hmm.
She didn't go to Georgetown Law. She went to a law school, a fine institution in California, but not one of the giant ones. She worked her way up at a more slow and methodical pace. And what I'm getting at with her Saturn is almost exactly sextile the moon, or yep, the moon, and almost exactly sextile her sun. So this is someone who has lived their life with Saturn intimately linked to their um, luminaries. And so when
Hmm.
we see the COVID cluster work through there, and we see Saturn hit these hard angles, this is someone who's adapted to that. This isn't, there's a reserve of Saturn uh, mojo or juju, or however you want to put it, with this person. So even the stuff that's hitting hard is stuff that she's going to be able to deal with a stiff upper lip might be a good way to put it with Saturn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like, Saturn is her malefic out of sect. So that, yeah, Saturn in Aquarius, it's retrograde also at 28 degrees.
But
It
domiciled.
Yes, but it's in domicile. So there is this sense of it being, a little bit harsher to deal with. And I think also with the retrograde, there is a sense of delays, um, but it does have that nice sextile to her moon and trine to her sun that I think really is like a saving grace in a lot of ways, because I mean, the only other, well, it does also have a loose opposition um to Mars and square Jupiter, but besides that, it's like I think it's almost like it works in her favor in a way that when she does kind of take her time, and pace herself and kind of mind Saturn, that um, yeah, it makes me think with the sun and the moon that her parental influence was kind of Saturnian, like her parents, in their path, and sort of like modeling her path off of her parents. And um yeah, and how they did sort of have this like American dream story when they were like both immigrants, and they obviously had a rough time getting to where they eventually got to. And sort of I kind of see that Saturn influence, sextile and trine her luminaries, being like, kind of, yeah, just being a part of that story. Like, it's
Both mom and
hard, but
dad
it's gonna.
grew up in traditional family units.
Yes, yes, that's true. Yeah. Um, and so yeah, I mean, Saturn in Aquarius too. Kamala's second Saturn return is pretty much kicked off, but definitely officially kicking off in December, when Saturn enters Aquarius for good. So that's also really interesting. I didn't look at her annual perfections. I wish I did. Um, I can't do the math off the top of my head. Well, 64, so she would be turning what, 56 this year? I should know that because my mom was born a month after her, or 2 months after her. Yeah, I believe that would be 56. Um, and 56 divided by 12, who knows? 60 would be the first house, so 59, 58, 57, right? 56. So ninth house
Ninth
year.
house, yeah.
Holy
Saturn year.
shit.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, she's about to enter ninth house year, which is where her Saturn is. Um, and yeah, and that happens right before her Saturn return kicks off too. So that's really interesting, assuming some big responsibilities. And in the astrology podcast episode, they looked at a lot of progressions. And I wish I had my notes in front of me, which is, I feel dumb for not keeping it, but there's something about her Saturn. Yeah, so you can see here, I just pulled up her progress chart. Her progress Saturn is currently at 29 degrees, 59 degrees Aquarius. Um, and I believe it's around election. Okay. Okay, so yes, basically on election day, right around election day, her progressed Saturn will move into Pisces for the first time in her life. So because she was born with Saturn retrograde natally, it was towards the end of Aquarius, but it took a while to like station direct and then move forward. So now, right after she turns 56, her natal Saturn is changing signs, and that's going to enter her natal 10th house as well, right when she enters this ninth house Saturn perfection year too. So there's a lot of, taking on big responsibilities coming up. Not to mention, in this progress chart, this is I'm looking at November 16th. I just fast forwarded it a month from today. But we have her natal, or her progress moons in Taurus, um, inching towards her progress Jupiter as well. So she's about to have this moon Jupiter conjunction. It's trining her Uranus, Pluto, Mars conjunction in Virgo. This is all progressed. Yeah, there's a lot of, her progress chart looks pretty good. And then this to me is like one of the most interesting parts. Her progressed sun is at 24 degrees of Sagittarius. This is in November. And what else do we have on on December 14th, 2020? We have a solar eclipse at 24 degrees Sagittarius, on the South Node, which is where her progressed sun is currently at 24. So that's really interesting to me too.
If you look at this progress chart too and move the moon to where it's full, which is oftentimes a peak period in a person's life, it
Mm-hmm.
indicates kind of a fulfillment. It's her progressed sun and moon will be eclipsed at this point. So it's really her progressions are really spectacular and shockingly good. She's in a
Yes.
peak zodiacal releasing period.
Yep.
I had Patrick Watson on to discuss Kamala's nativity and some of the progressions, and it's like when I was saying that she's basically a talisman for this period of time. I
Yeah.
really wasn't kidding. Like it's hard to find holes to poke in her astrology during this period.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. The ZR, the zodiacal releasing peak that she's entering. When does that start? Like around election day, right? Or
I
is
think
it
it's right around an
inauguration?
inauguration.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. And that's going to be a pretty big peak because it's happening in Pisces, which is opposite her benefic of sect, Virgo. So that's like a pretty big peak. And yeah, I just fast forwarded her progress chart to September 2023, which would be around the time you would start campaigning for an election.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, we have this lunar eclipse in Gemini, which also has like a Mercury Cazimi with it as well. So
Yeah, it's nuts.
it's a lot. It's interesting. I actually have the same lunar eclipse happening like 2 years after that in my progress chart. Um, but anyway, back to Kamala's natal. So yeah, I mean, honestly, and I'm not making a prediction here at all, but I will say learning about the astrology of Kamala Harris's chart and the peaks coming up for her and just how happening her chart looks over the next 5 years even
I like that.
is the only thing that I'm kind of holding on to for hope. Like it just seems a little too good to look like a defeat. It just doesn't really look like a defeat in my opinion. That's not to say that, that Biden's going to win. That's not to say any of that, but it looks like bare minimum that her status is being raised significantly, and the fact that she's kind of on the ticket as vice president, I mean, it's like what else could it be? Could be a lot of things,
For
but
for a candidate who's likely post election to announce that they're only going to serve one term.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. um and so I and this, for the sake of time, I'm not going to pull up Pence's chart. Well, I'll pull it up for like a second. I just don't want to get too into it because I want to talk about the chart of election day. We don't have a ton of time, unfortunately, because I could talk about this for 3 hours easily.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up Pence's chart. Mike Pence was born on June 7th, 1959, in Columbus, Indiana. We do not have a birth time for Mike Pence, but I like to use a sunrise chart, which basically will put the sun in the first house. So Pence was born during a Gemini new moon. His sun and moon are both in Gemini, and his Mercury is also in Gemini. His sun's at 15 degrees, roughly. It could be at 16, depending on the time he was born. His moon is roughly in late Gemini. There's a potential his moon is in Cancer, depending on the time that he was born. And then his Mercury is about 21 degrees of Gemini. He has this Venus Mars conjunction in Leo. And then he also has Saturn in Capricorn, at 5 degrees Capricorn retrograde. His Jupiter is at 24 Scorpio. It's just interesting. It's opposite Kamala's Jupiter, at 25 Taurus. So that's interesting to think about. And then he also has this Regulus placement, which we've seen in both Trump and Biden's chart. He has his Pluto at 1 degree of Virgo. It's a little bit off Regulus, but it's close enough in my opinion to mention. Um, yeah. Any initial thoughts looking at Pence's untimed birth chart?
Whenever I look at Pence's chart, I see a tricksy hobbit. I see
What's
all that.
that?
I see all that Gemini. I see communication. Again, Gemini take in data, communicate it. I see. So when I look at Venus in Leo, I think of someone who desires the story, who
Mm,
desires a certain amount of recognition, thinking of Leo as the need to shine. And then you see that conjunct Mars. And it's like the story he desires is that conflict between the
Hmm.
sexes. I apologize.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and that's just been such a part of Pence's life. Now, one thing I will say about this, normally I have no problem looking at charts. You don't see much notable here. If you look at Pence transits, you do, there are some kind of mildly benefic things that take place over the next short period, but nothing that's either great or really bad. This
Yeah.
is someone who I would love to see a time for, and I don't always
Yep.
feel that way. But I'd
Mhm.
love to know what Pence's 12th house is, what he's hiding. I would
Yeah.
love to know what Pence's ninth house is, because we know this is someone who's so strongly identified with their religion. Um, we don't have those things. Um, One other thing I would note is that we have that Mars retrograde co-present with Pence's south node. So we might see someone who has some diminishment in their energy during this
Mhm.
period, who might step away. And I think that if, and we'll see how that plays out there.
Yeah.
That's what I have to say about this one.
Yeah, I think the main thing that stands out for me is how there's not much agreement happening in this chart. There's a lot of aversions actually. And that's kind of what I get from him. Also, yeah, not very notable. I don't think he's going to be someone that is remembered in history. I mean, he's, obviously the vice president of, in my opinion, the worst one of the worst presidents we've ever had in this country, but still he kind of lingers in the background, lingers in the shadows in a lot of ways. And so yeah, I agree, I would love to see his 12th house. um and yeah, there's, to me, I mean, his Leo stuff does, I guess there's a sign based sextile to his Gemini stuff, but besides that, everything else is in aversion to one another. um yeah, with the Leo square the Jupiter too, but even that, it's not degree based at all. There's pretty much a lot of aversions between the planets. And to me, he seems like someone that denies a lot of, um, perhaps his natural urges. He's very bland. He's very, straightforward, I guess, in a way, but not like a very dodgy sort of person, but comes off very like clean and,
It's someone who uses their folksy persona to hide their actual intentions. And that's when
yes,
I say a tricksy hobbit. This is someone who uses communication to kind of evade and be duplicitous.
that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Next, I don't want to talk about his chart anymore.
Thank you. This is not my favorite person. I don't even find this guy interesting.
No, he's so, yeah, he makes me cringe. Okay, so let's look at the chart of election day. I think that's probably
Good
the
choice.
best place to go next. So let me pull that up. And election day, of course, um, is what, the 3rd of November?
While you're doing this, I want to reflect on one other thing with Kamala's chart is that she has that natal Pluto Uranus conjunction. And
Mm-hmm.
the last election, um, which in a lot of ways was a chaos election, we've never seen anything like it, was
Yeah,
during a Pluto Uranus square.
right.
And in a lot of ways, what we've had is a Pluto Uranus administration. And again, we look at Kamala, and it's right in her guts, it's in her fourth house. This is someone who can deal with that chaos. Um, who again just grew up with that energy just right in the gullet. So I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to point that out too.
Yeah, in conjunct her benefic of sect, which it rules her sun too,
Yeah.
her Venus in Virgo. Yeah. Um, okay, so I pulled up the chart for election day, November 3rd, 2020. I pulled it at 7 a.m. I don't know what time the polls open. Probably should have looked that up. But there's a lot of discrepancies around like what time do you use, for election day.
I tend to look at when I kind of think we'll get our first results, which
Okay.
on the West Coast is probably around 5, so that's 8. We'll have some stuff by then.
Yeah, let's look
But
at that.
timing is tough. Um, Especially since A, so many people have voted, and B, with the nature of this election, there's a lot of states that are going to be pivotal that aren't going to allow their folks to start counting ballots until election day. So
Yeah.
places like Pennsylvania, number one, not all of them will probably be in yet,
I'm hoping
because
mine will be.
you can, I think you can have it postmarked until like 2 days before the election or something like that.
Something like that.
And
Yeah.
then they can't even count them until the
Mm-hmm.
day of. So they're not going to get done counting more than likely. And they're not all even going to be there. So that's just,
Yeah.
it's hard to find a time when polls open because they're already open.
Yeah, that's true. The election is happening right now. It
Right.
ends on November 3rd. So yeah, I just fast forwarded to 8 p.m. November 3rd, Washington, D.C. We have the moon at 21 degrees Gemini on the North Node, which is, a spot where we see a couple of our candidates have planets there or placements. Mercury has just stationed direct. So actually, let me go back to 8 a.m. so we can see Mercury is actually still retrograde at that point, I think. Yeah. Mercury stationing on election day, if you didn't already know, and it's stationing at 25 degrees of Libra, which is right smack dab in the middle of the cardinal crunch. It's going to be stationing square, and an applying square to Saturn at 26 degrees of Capricorn. And we have Mars getting ready to station a week later, or sorry, 10 days later, at 15 Aries. So, first impressions, Kip.
So I want to do a couple things because I'm going to try to be flowery with this. I apologize. It's
That's cool.
not my nature, but I'm going to do it that way. Number one, we have the moon, and we have the moon really close to the current president's sun and where the North Node is. I like to think of that as women showing up where he shines. I
Hmm.
know that is the most positive possible way you could look at that, but that's what I'm doing. You can at me. Then we have Mercury stationing, and in a lot of ways, that is a chance for effery. For I don't know if you want me swearing in your podcast because I don't know
No,
how
you
you
can
mark it or
swear.
whatever. Okay, fuckery, right?
Yes.
Mercury, the trickster, has just been retrograde. So lots of Mercury, lots of communication, lots of stuff going backwards, lots of things to review in Libra. Um, where we can see people more interested in balancing things out than getting it right, which is I think what we saw the last time Mercury stationed direct on election day, which was in 2000. And
Yep.
what we had people, especially on the left, who might have been a little too eager just to make sure things were done correctly than to really find out what the results were going to be. What I want to frame this as, because I think the symbols tell us this, is twofold. Number one, we have Mercury squaring Saturn. So that's a big dose of reality. That's
Hmm.
here's your effery right here. I am in Capricorn, the place of the past, the place of stability, the place of how things are done the right way that I am controlling. And this is what I got for your effery right here. Like you're running into this brick wall. Number two, we have Mercury stationing in Venus's sign, co-present with Venus. That's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Venus in Libra is lovely. There's
Justice.
right. Um, things that look good, things that are arranged the way they should be, things that are balancing out. Um, and and not for nothing, Saturn, who's making contact with Mercury here, that's Saturn's favorite place to be is in Libra. So there's an affinity between Saturn making contact with this sign
Mm-hmm.
um, to Mercury. So again, I'm being flowery on purpose because I don't want to crawl into a hole and cry. Um, and then what we see is, if we're going to talk about the transits of the folks who are running, um, we see all that stuff opposing uh, the 45 in a really sensitive and delicate way. Oftentimes, the 12th house is considered the house of mental health. We could see people institutionalizing their transits to that region from the house of bad health. So if you want to wish ill on 45, this isn't a great look. We do have power here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because we see Jupiter only less really than a degree away from Pluto. And for the other gentleman, Uncle Joe, this is forming, it's 3 degrees away from his best placement in his house, which is that natal Jupiter. And so we see two Jupiters and Pluto. We see lots of power moving between each other. Um, so I could say lots of negative things about this. We see Mars retrograde. And that's, I'm surprised we haven't seen more violence.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of time to see some more just complete dicing things up and separating things, which is, I think, going to even more become a tactic of one side as they get cornered.
Mm-hmm.
But there are delightful, positive things that speak of good outcomes here, and that's where I'm putting my attention.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what stands out to me is the moon in Gemini, sorry, um, being ruled by that stationing Mercury. And to me, this speaks to, well, the
Love
moon
this.
representing the populace, like the people, um, and Mercury stationing. The first thing I think of is like delays, long lines, like having to really wait a long time, which is why I've been encouraging people, if you can vote early, vote early. If you can, do a ballot and drop it off, do that. Um, Last resort to be voting on election day. And if you're doing that, go as early as possible. Because yeah, it just looks like massive delays in my opinion, which is already, we're expecting that. Astrologer, like you don't have to be an astrologer to to
I
guess
know.
that. um but yeah, and then Mercury stationing, so let me fast forward again to 8 p.m. um in that square to, let's see, it's going to be on pretty close to Kamala Harris's sun. It's going to be, like we said, squaring Joe Biden's Jupiter, his chart ruler, exactly, basically. And then also squaring Donald Trump's Venus in Cancer, and then with that also his Saturn in Cancer. Or sorry, not squaring, opposing, right? No, squaring, right? Yeah, squaring. Getting the cardinal crunch mixed up in my head. So yeah, that to me is interesting. Also, just to note, the sun will be transiting Joe Biden's natal Mars, which is interesting because that is his malefic out of sect. That's his 12th house. His Mars is at, I think, 12 degrees um, of Scorpio. So that sounds like some fuckery afoot, in my opinion, from his enemies, basically, and that spotlight kind of being on them. Um, and let's just rewind a couple days to that full moon on Saturday. Oh God, dyslexia. Uh, October
31st.
October 31st. I just want to say Halloween, but yeah, October 31st. And which is happening right smack dab on top of transiting Uranus. Um, and that's interesting to me for a variety of reasons. Because I'm like, okay, what's being revealed, right? Like some shocking twists and turns happening days before the election, which is interesting because so many votes are going to have already been cast at this point. So it's like, what is this? This is Joe's natal full moon. We can say that. So he was born, right before a Taurus full moon. Um, and this will be in his sixth house. So more a little behind the scenes, if anything, maybe something with his staff. But this is Trump's 10th house. And yeah, I mean, that's interesting to me, the fact that there's going to be this like very loud, I would even say, shocking, scandalous, even full moon happening right in his 10th house, the most public part of the chart. Do you have any thoughts about that?
It's again, this speaks of disruption. This speaks of potential fuckery. If I were going to look at a spot this month where there was going to be an October surprise, this is like a surprising turn of events. And the thing is, like, I don't even know how this could play into the election this late. It's four
Yeah.
days away or 3 days away from voting. It's I would say more than 50% of votes will have been cast at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to be some shit. I
Yeah.
guarantee it. like
Yeah.
Halloween, something disruptive is going to take place. Uh, and just one more thing to look forward to in 2020. Congratulations.
Definitely. Yeah. And this is also like Mercury, it hasn't stationed yet, but it's at this point
Very
pretty
slow.
much,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very slow, and it's by degree squaring Saturn. So when it does station, it's like a degree, it's at 25 and Saturn's at 26. But at this moment, and that probably happens the day before on the 30th. Oh no, okay. So maybe the day after. Yeah, because it's going backwards. Yeah, so it's basically stationing in this exact square to Saturn during this full moon too. It's just, whew, we'll see. We'll see what that's about. But yeah, that's something to look out for sure. Okay, so I wanted to we looked at election day. I want to quickly pull up election day of 2000 because it's just a little too wild in my opinion, looking at the similarities, and then also the differences. And the main similarity, really, it's just that we have Mercury stationing in late Libra on the day of the election. And I was 8 years old, about to turn 9 years old during this day. I remember it very well, but I believe you have a couple years on me, Kipp. So do you want to talk about what happened on this day in 2000?
I was in my early 20s. I was very politically active, much more so than now. Um, this election happened when our economy was an all-time high. So, and the catchphrase for this election was, the two parties are the same. It doesn't matter who you vote for.
Mm.
And that allowed Nader to siphon enough votes away from Al Gore to lose the election. Feel free to
Mm-hmm.
at me. We can have that conversation. Um,
Yeah, that's real quick. The major players here was George W. Bush,
yep.
Al Gore, and
Who
then
had been
Ralph.
vice president 8 years for the
Mm-hmm.
previous 8 years.
Yes, and then Ralph Nader.
A
Sorry,
Green
continue.
Party candidate. Um, I want to talk about two things. Number one is that Mercury retrograde. Here, though, we see Mars in Mars's fall in the same sign as I'm sorry, Mars's detriment in the same sign as as Mercury, as opposed to Venus. So there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't much sweetness in this communication. It was rough and grainy and gravelly. That the idea of justice was less prevalent. It kind of had more to do with just getting the scales squared as quickly and as
Yes.
best we could. Number two, I want to talk about, and I talked about this earlier. The thing that will be talked about the most about this period of time will be the Pluto Saturn opposition, and we're now in the conjunction that culminated this opposition. But on election day, we saw Pluto 3 degrees away from an opposition with Jupiter. So again, Pluto, Jupiter, power. Like there's a
Mm.
chance to access power. Then I finally want to point to Mars making contact with Neptune. So Mars was so diminished. Mars was accessing how we tell this story. Mars didn't have much vim or vigor. Um, we're in such a different place. Especially the blue team is ready to fight. They didn't. There's no fatigue from having 8 years of the Bill Clinton presidency, which, if
Right.
folks don't know, this is where popularized right wing lunacy came from.
Right.
The stories surrounding Bill Clinton were, some of them were true. He had an affair with a staffer while in office, and some of them that he had a kill list, literally had a kill list,
They still
and all
think
these.
that.
Well, it's really spectacular. It's kind of unbelievable. And then we had the sun really close to a square with Uranus, so we had just more chances for fuckery.
Mm-hmm.
We had, again, that Mercury stationing, not much support in the chart. In fact, you would say that as far as a whole sign goes, there's negative aspects there. And then you have just the sun, the MF and star that our solar system revolves around. making really direct contact and continuing that contact over the next couple days with the most disruptive planet in the zodiac.
Yep.
So
And
this
being ruled by Mars in detriment.
right. So this is just such a different time period with different themes. I think for me, the thing I see that is most relevant is there's access to power,
Mm,
um, and fuckery, because that, like, make no mistake, Mercury stationing direct on an election day is fuckery.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. And I think that the most hopeful thing you can get out of comparing these two charts is the fact that the station in 2000, which by the way, I didn't say this before, it was November 7th, 2000, which was election day that year, 20 years ago. Wow. And yeah, that Mercury stationing in late Libra was being ruled by Venus and Sag. So, Venus didn't have much dignity there. Venus and Sag is being ruled by Jupiter in detriment in Gemini retrograde. So, there's that. And it was co present with Mars in its detriment in Libra. Whereas this year we have that Mercury stationing, while it is stationing square Saturn, it's stationing square Saturn in domicile in its own sign, and it's more importantly co-present with Venus in Libra in its own sign, in Venus in its first decan, the first decan of Libra too. So yeah, there's just something a little bit less chaotic almost about the election chart of this year as compared to 2000. All
I would
right.
almost argue that Saturn takes some of that chaos away. Like that
Yes.
Saturn squaring Mercury, like communication is hitting boundaries. Like there's stability, there's responsibility, there's authority, there's boundaries, and
Mm-hmm.
they are enforced. Maybe too much, but they're there.
Yes, I totally agree. Um, okay, I guess we have about 15 minutes. I unfortunately have a reading after this that I have to get to, but I want to pull up one more chart, I think, maybe two more charts so we can get to it. One being this solar eclipse on December 14th, 2020, which happens at 23 degrees of Sagittarius, which before we said, Kamala Harris, her progressed sun is around this degree too. So that's interesting to think about. And yeah, we have this lunar eclipse, and I wanted to pull this up in particular because this is the day that the Electoral College places its votes. So that's interesting. Mars will be direct at this point and it's at 20 degrees of Aries. What else? And it's trine that solar eclipse, trine Mercury at this point. We have Jupiter and Saturn very close to a conjunction at 28 degrees, basically 29 degrees of Capricorn. So this is just days before they both slip into Aquarius and then form a conjunction a week later on December 21st. So at this point, this is when I think things start to really begin to look clear. And it seems like we'll definitely, I mean, this is when the Electoral College votes, so we will have a result, I guess, at this point. Yeah, what are your thoughts about this?
I think my thoughts are I look at eclipses as portals. I don't, it's a 20-minute talk to make it simple, but I look at them as portals. I look at them as disruptive. I oftentimes think of them as malefic,
Mm-hmm.
although they don't have to be. Um, and I see this disruptive new moon, something starting new in Joe Biden's first house.
Yep.
Um, in Sagittarius, philosophy, kind of bubbliness, um, eagerness, and I see it with Mercury trining Mars, finally entering the last decan of Aries after being retrograde in the sign for like 400 years. And what I see is the story of this retrograde, which to me is the story of this election cycle.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot to do with COVID. It has a lot to do with fighting. It has a lot to do with dividing and separating and heating things up. And I think this is the story being told on this day about what happened.
Yeah. There's something also really interesting about the benefics being sextile each other. Yes, they are in, like, it's Venus and its detriment in Scorpio at 28 degrees, and it's Jupiter in its fall and Capricorn at 28 degrees. But there's some agreement between the benefics too during this, which I think is really interesting, especially because you have that Jupiter ruling this lunation too. So that's a nice little
They're almost
touch there.
they're almost bonifying the
Yes.
conjunction because they're like that's almost the midpoint between them.
Yes, that's true. That's really true. And then, the fact that this solar eclipse is happening, it's right smack on top of Kamala Harris's descendant, which would be her partner, which would be Joe Biden. Um,
Yeah.
so that to me is another thing that I'm looking at, the fact that this is on her progressed sun, it's on her, her natal descendant, which is also her natal south node too. So there's just a lot of, it's definitely lighting up like Biden and Harris's charts. It's going to be in Trump's fifth house. I don't I don't know what that means really for Trump, but it's not, oh sorry, it's in his fifth house and also on top of his south node moon conjunction. And like I said before earlier, his moon rules his 12th house, which holds those, his Mercury, his and what is it called, Venus Saturn conjunction. um so yeah, that's interesting to me too, like having this lunation on top of his natal moon, which is, an eclipsed moon on top of that. There's this double eclipse happening. And I've heard like Sam Reynolds before talk about how, like, he doesn't think that this eclipse cycle is necessarily going to like take Trump down, which because he's born during this eclipse cycle, which I agree with in a lot of ways. However, if there is an eclipse that takes him down, perhaps it will be one that's conjunct his already, like, not detrimented but not so hot moon, which is being eclipsed. It's on the south node. It's out of sect, his day chart. And yeah, I don't know. There's something about like a solar eclipse kind of eclipsing his eclipsed natal moon that rules his 12th house that just definitely doesn't seem comfortable.
Doesn't seem benefic. I would
Doesn't seem
also just
benefic.
point out the south node is purgative, so let's just
Yes.
this could be a purgative time.
Yes. Yeah. Um yeah, I don't I don't want to make any predictions, I don't want to make any concrete predictions around this, but I just looking at the bare bones astrology of it, it looks um I wouldn't even say more benefic, but it looks more positive overall for the Democrats. Um yeah, and again, like, that's not a prediction. It can go a lot of different ways, but um yeah, that's just my opinion, I guess, on this chart. Okay, last chart I'm gonna look at is the inauguration chart, which is not so pretty. Um, and the inauguration happens January 20th, 2021. It's a Wednesday. And I'm pretty sure it always happens at noon. Wait, is this right? Or does it happen at noon?
I don't recall. I have it saved someplace. Tell me.
Okay, because I don't believe this. Someone, I feel like someone told me it always happens at noon, but I'm pretty sure the moon isn't in Taurus yet. So maybe I'm wrong. Um, but I've seen it a million times. Yeah, that's weird. Okay, so maybe it just happens during it. Whatever. We'll use this for now. Um, so yeah, the inauguration January 20th in DC. We get the sun at 0 degrees, basically 1 degree Aquarius, which is conjunct a fixed star called Altair, which is interesting. We
Which is
have,
revisiting the Grand Conjunction,
yes, which is
shining a
revisiting.
light. Yeah,
Exactly. Which happens December 21st. So basically exactly a month prior to this, Jupiter and Saturn will meet up at 0 degrees Aquarius. And so the sun is now at that degree during the inauguration. Saturn's at 3 degrees, 356, so almost 4 degrees of Aquarius, and Jupiter is at 7 degrees of Aquarius. Mercury is at 19 Aquarius. We have Pluto at 24 Capricorn. So finally past that 22 degrees, but still within that, late cardinal crunch, zone, although it's literally the only planet in that zone at this point. Thank God. And then we have Venus at 15 Capricorn. So yeah, most important stuff is we have these 4 planets in Aquarius in the 10th house of this chart. And then in the first house, we have Mars applying exactly there's a minute in between them. Mars applying to Uranus exactly at 6 degrees Taurus. And then what I have pulled up here has the moon at 0 degrees Taurus. I've seen it before where the moon's at 29 Aries. So it's in between. It moves from 29 Aries to 0 Taurus, I think, during the ceremony, which is interesting. But yeah, it'll enter Taurus, which, that's Joe Biden's lunar return. Just putting it out there. His natal moon's at 0 Taurus. So yeah, first thoughts, Kipp, looking at this chart.
Look, there are goods and bads with this chart. I'll start with the goods. We have Mercury trining the north node and sextiling the south node. So we're gonna hear about what's coming. And we have the sun sitting on top of Altair, taking a look at what the great conjunction is gonna bring, and that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
What's negative on this chart is we have Mars really closely conjunct Uranus, almost like so close. They're on top of each other.
Yeah.
And we have Mars heating things up and dividing things, Uranus disruptive. One way to talk about this is a volcano erupting, and we have it square and approaching an even more exact square to Jupiter, which makes things bigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's like a boil that pops or things that explode.
Yeah, not to mention it's Mars in its detriment. So Mars had just spent six months about in its own sign, kind of just like doing its own thing. Yes, it was in squares with Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto, but it had dignity that whole time. And then early January it slips into Taurus and it's no longer in its own sign. It's being ruled by Venus. And yeah, then it has this collision with Uranus, which is Mars Uranus aspects tend to speak to some sort of violent, like a violent sort of like, I don't know, explosion doesn't have to be an explosion, but something kind of that triggers, something reactive, I guess.
It's in Taurus, so I'm gonna say I hope this is an earthquake.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's an earthquake and not violent acts that humans make. But it's in the first house. It's not pretty, I will say that. And the square to Jupiter doesn't help either. Yeah, this is just a very contentious chart. It's just this, it kind of speaks to the Saturn Uranus squares that we're going to have throughout 2021. We get 3 exact squares. The first one's going to be on February 14th, Valentine's Day. The next one's going to be on June 14th. And then we have which is right in the middle of eclipse season. And then we have another one on Christmas Eve of 2021 on December 24th. So yeah, I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but I just wanted to pull it up. Just that I think this inauguration chart, I think, speaks to the energy of 2021, which seems to be a lot about clashes, basically. And like, I kind of look at the Saturn Uranus square as like the people sort of like rebelling against the establishment, and what people what groups of people those are, probably plenty different groups, left and right. regardless of who, gets into office. But I can't help but think about, um, Proud Boys stand back and what is it? Stand ready or whatever. Stand back and what did he say during the debate? I'm losing it. Stand back, stand guard. No, something like that. Basically, telling people to get ready. There's been a lot of talk about violence if he does not, if Trump does not get reelected, and I can't help but think about that looking at this chart. um yeah, I think that just speaks to that ongoing square, and how it's even if Joe Biden wins and a good section of the country is happy about that, it doesn't seem like it's going to be like good from there on out. It looks like there's still going to be a lot of clashes. What do you think?
I agree with everything you're saying. I would also like to point out that Neptune is in the bendings, meaning Neptune
Yes.
is exactly square the nodes. So the raw material of the story, um, the the stuff it's all made out of, the diffuse fogginess is in the place where we oftentimes talk about the where the past and the future come together.
Hmm.
Um, so the story is not written one way or another, and chances are it's not going to be clear what it looks like. And I think that that's for sure. We're still going to be in COVID time. I really hope that Mars square Jupiter doesn't have to do with that either. Um, but just
Yeah.
one more exciting thing. This is like the remnant chart of 2020 right here.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, do you have any final remarks, thoughts, things that you want to say about the astrology of this election?
I think that for folks who are just astrology nerds, there's lots of really interesting stuff. Um, we have big outer planet conjunctions. We're coming on a 200 year slash 20-year conjunction that happens just after the election. There's just so many eclipses, which are always a focus every year, and they happen just smack dab on the folks in the middle of things and right during main processes. We've got the Mercury retrograde, which is almost like common nomenclature happening during this period. There's a lot to learn. There's things to be hopeful of. There's things to be a little suspicious of. I just want to thank you, Kirah, for having me on to discuss this. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm I don't know if excited is the right word, but I'm eager to see how this stuff plays out.
Me too. Thank you so much for being on and nerding out with me. It's always a pleasure. Um, where can folks find you? I know you don't, do readings and stuff, but if someone wanted to, get in touch or anything like that, where would they find you?
If you want to check out the podcast, it's the Basement Astrologers. There's some stuff that's relevant to things that are going on. There's lots of great guests that I really had fun talking to. If you want to check me out on Twitter, I'm at Udamania Astro. I'm not going to spell that right now.
Yeah,
If
I'll
you
put
look at
links.
yeah, because I doubt everyone's got a pen and a paper, anyways. So yeah, you can find me. You can follow my stuff. I'm not as front and center as a lot of folks, but I'm definitely part of the community and I enjoy myself.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kipp. Talk to you soon.
Bye, Kirah.